Hello, adventurers, and welcome back to the Dragon's Lair. Today we will be discussing Draco Malfoy. So, let's jump right into it, shall we? Now, before we get started, I have to say, a few things came up, and unfortunately Chill will not be with me today. So, forgive me for, well, whatever happens next. Starting off with Draco Malfoy's strength. It's not the greatest, right? He's not expressly weak. That being said, he's not the strongest either. So, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, we should be good. He's the seeker of his Quidditch team. Now, that's not a position that requires the greatest amount of strength. So there is that. I mean, there are a few instances of strength, though, while he's being the Seeker. Like, when he battles it out with Harry for the Golden Snitch. He manages to take and give a few solid body bashes. So, that's worth noting as well. That being said, I don't think that, that qualifies him for a super good strength score. Other than that, there's not a whole lot Draco does in the way of strength, right? I mean, there's really not. He's the type of person that would have henchmen and lackeys to go and do his work for him, hence Crabbe and Goyle. It's just not his thing. So, he doesn't do it often, and it's not super important to him. So, for the score, I'm going to go 6 to 12, just kind of depending on how much you think the body bashes between him and Harry during the Quidditch matches says for Draco's strength. I would say 14 at the absolute maximum, but my main score is going to be 6 to 12. As for dexterity, well, as I said, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1... He's the Seeker for the Quidditch team, right? That's going to take a lot of speed, agility, nimbleness to get in and out of things quickly, and a really good dexterity score to try to grab the Golden Snitch, which is a very small golden flying orb, right? We should all know what that is by now, but it's going to take a lot of dexterity to be able to follow it and then obtain it. So, that has to count for something. Aside from that, from a more battle standpoint, he fights Harry a couple of times, so that's something to note as well. And in these duels, we see that he's relatively hard to hit and relatively good at avoiding and dodging strikes, which makes sense because he is a relatively small man. He's thin, I should say. He's not a tiny person, but he's not Crabbe size, Goyle size, because his henchmen were always bigger than he was. So he's relatively thin, and is going to be harder to hit because of that. And it certainly shows in these duels with Harry. He dodges strikes. He does get hit a few times, and he does manage to attack Harry a good time or two. So from an AC standpoint and an initiative standpoint, he's going to be relatively good with dexterity. That's just kind of my opinion. Now, he doesn't sneak around a whole lot, so we don't really ever get a stealth perspective from him. So that is worth noting as well. But, it's not the most important thing. It's not the only thing you do with dexterity. That's what a lot of people think when they think of dexterity, but it's not the only important skill related to dexterity. As for the Yule Ball, let me get the name right. He takes Pansy Parkinson to the Yule Ball. Yeah. There's not really a huge dance scene with him, so we never really get to see a whole lot. There might be a snippet here and there where you just kind of see him maybe in the background, or maybe he's in the foreground for a second or two, but he does take someone to the Yule Ball, and I assume he dances with them, so that's going to count for a little bit when it comes to the score, which, in my opinion, is going to be 16 to 14. Technically 14 to 16, doing the smaller number first. Because he's really agile when it comes to flying on the broom, doing the golden snitch thing, and sure, stealth is important, but it's not the only dexterity-based skill. And when you take in everything else into account, it kind of makes up for the fact that we don't ever get to see him sneaking around. Moving into Constitution. As I mentioned a minute ago, he's actually, well, before, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1. We should be good. As I mentioned a minute ago, with the duels between himself and Harry, he takes quite a few hits. He does really good in that aspect. I mean, at one point he gets launched back, but he manages just fine. So that is worth noting. Unfortunately, we don't get to see them finish the duel as Snape and another professor step in to kind of help and make sure that they don't kill each other, because they may very well have. But from what we do see of the duel, they both do relatively fine when it comes to taking and giving hits. As for anything else, yeah, the only other time that Constitution could have been used in the way of Draco Malfoy that I found was when he was threatened to be turned into a, I don't remember if it was a weasel or ferret, it was one of the two. But unfortunately, Professor McGonagall steps in and we never get to see it happen. It kind of would have been very funny. But, yeah, it's fair. You can't just, turn students into animals at the slightest inconvenience. I guess. Dang, I really think we missed out on that. That would have been really funny. But, yeah, as for the score, he takes a few hits and gives a few hits, so I'm going to say that for his Constitution, it's going to be middling above average, so I'm going to say 12 to 14, just because he's not terrible, right? He can take a few hits, but it's also Draco Malfoy, and he gives off the vibe as though, even though we see that he can take a few hits, he would rather not. He also freaks out at the slightest, now that I'm thinking about it, he also freaks out at the slightest hit from, I believe it was was it a hippogriff? Or was it a griffin? I'll leave that in the description below as to what animal it was, but it was the hawk horse thing. In one of the movies, he was being Draco Malfoy, and it wound up hitting him, and he freaked out about it. So, you know. Yeah, overall score, I'm going to go 12 to 14 for Draco's Constitution. Moving into Intelligence. I mean, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, before I get too far ahead of myself. He's not expressly stupid, but he's also not the brightest knife in the shed. Oh, it's D&D. I'm sure that's been a scenario at some point. Let's be fair. So, you know, going from the intelligence standpoint, he knows a few spells. He's not, just kind of there when it comes to wizardry. But you also have to attribute his upbringing to his hatred for Harry. Or, check that, flip it. His hatred for Harry is attributed to his upbringing, right? So, the Malfoys are, I said spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, I just did. So, the Malfoys are people that follow Voldemort at all costs. And as such, they're not gonna like the person that opposes Voldemort at all costs. So, it makes sense that he would be raised to say, to believe that Harry was evil and bad and all this. And we really only see it from Harry's perspective. So, we never really know what that entails for Draco Malfoy's upbringing, but it is safe to assume that that's the main reason behind Draco not liking Harry, and that sets up very easily for the rivalry between the two. That being said, as I said earlier, he is a relatively good wizard when it comes to his craft. Um, so, you know, what happened? Yeah, I mean, he's not a bad wizard. He's just a bad person. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really up to you as to what you think his intelligence should be. If you think he was raised poorly to hate Harry, and that therefore his intelligence is really, really poor, okay. If you see him as a better wizard, I mean, he did a good job in the duels, and is certainly able to cast spells alongside Harry when it comes to their skill level, then you're going to think he's got a higher intelligence. So it's really up to you, but for my scores, to try to encompass all of it, I'm going to say it's somewhere between like 8 and 16, which is a pretty big point difference, if I do say so myself. Moving into wisdom. Covering my bases, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, we should be good. This is going to be the statistic where he lacks a little bit, right? He doesn't really ever think anything through. I mean, first off, you have his hatred for Harry. So, he was given that information, and then he just kind of accepted it and moved on with his life. And that sets up, as I said, for the rivalry. Then you also have the time where he, at one point, catches Harry sneaking around after hours and reports him to McGonagall. At first glance, it's fine, he was doing the right thing. And then she drops a bit of reality on him as to why exactly was Draco Malfoy sneaking around at night, and therefore given the ability to catch Harry Potter sneaking around at night. So that's what I mean when I say he doesn't really think anything through. It's, on the one hand, he accepts information and just moves on with it, not really ever seeing if it's true or not. And then on the other hand, he doesn't think through his scenarios in the way of, I caught Harry sneaking around at night. Wait, that also means I was sneaking around at night. Huh, that's not going to wind up well for me. So it's that sort of thing. So there's also the elephant in the room with he tried to fight Dumbledore. I just want to point this out. This like 16-year-old kid who hasn't even graduated from Hogwarts, decided, you know what's a good idea? Me killing one of the best wizards of all time. And like, that's not an opinion. He lived for like 150 years. That's canon within the movie. Like, if you're gonna live for 150 years, you're gonna be a good wizard. So, let's just let this 16-year-old kid go up against a 150-year-old master wizard. It's a great idea. I don't see what could go wrong. So that he didn't really think that one through. Just gonna duel a master wizard real quick. Everything's gonna be fine. Now, at the end, I said spoiler alert, but in this time that I've recapped, you've had enough time to click off the video in the event that you haven't seen it. Snape had to step in for him and wound up killing Dumbledore. So there is that. But just the notion that this 16-year-old kid was gonna walk up and be able to duel and kill a master wizard just kind of doesn't bode well for the wisdom of the kid. I mean, all in all, I have to say that his wisdom is low. I'm going to go with something like 4 to 8. For me personally. But, you know, if you found something that I didn't that boosts his wisdom a little bit, go right on ahead and make your score your own. Moving into charisma. This is a very important skill for him. I mean, pretty much any instance he's involved in, one of his main catchphrases is, my father will hear of this, or hear about this, or something along those lines. I don't have the exact quotation in front of me, but, you know, he always threatens to go to his dad, and then apparently that'll be resolved in that way. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it's assumed that it's not good. Well, that's intimidation at its finest. So he relies pretty heavily on charisma. Now, before I get too much further in there, into this stat, I'm going to say, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, we should be good. Now, I didn't say it before because him going to his dad's not really a spoiler for anything, because I didn't go into specifics as to what he was getting his dad about. But now, just in case I misspeak and say something, I've covered my base. I mean, another instance of charisma is Crabbe and Goyle. He always has those two following him around and doing pretty much whatever he says. I mean, at one point, Hagrid is welcomed back into the halls of Hogwarts, and he actually winds up pulling one of the two of them, I think it was Crabbe, I am not 100% certain, back down to sit next to him, because they shouldn't be happy about it, but Crabbe was kind of caught up in the moment. Turns out that was actually unscripted, which is kind of cool that the actor was able to think of that on the fly. But I think it represents Draco Malfoy very well, and it is canon in the movie that that's what happened, so it makes sense. He kind of leads his henchmen, for lack of a better term, in what they should do. He seems to be, as well, very tied into emotion. For instance, Scared Potter comes up a lot, and I know I'm not saying that right, and I'm not going to try because I cannot do the accent correctly. I'm sorry. But, yeah, Are You Scared, Potter comes up a lot from him. Pretty much any time he says or does something early on, are you scared, Potter? The answer, of course, is always no, but he's tied very heavily to that emotion, trying to put fear into Harry, I guess to make him back down a little bit. So, there is that. Little bit on a more ad hominem note, he also strikes me as the type of person that would go into a corner and cry when Crabbe and Goyle aren't around, because no one really likes him, because he's kind of a tool. Just a bit of one. But, you know, it's just a thought. That's just my opinion. So, you know, there is that. Do with that information what you will. All in all, I'm going to say that he usually would fail the charisma check on the audience, right? Because we're sitting there and we're with Harry. We back Harry pretty much all the way. Because we see it from his point of view. He's the main character. So, like, we don't have any fear of Draco Malfoy. But it's understandable as to how people that live in the moment with him, assuming it were real, would be fearful of him. I mean, his dad is a very powerful wizard, very high up, and follows the most evil person in existence, so there is that too. But it makes sense how they would be fearful, even though the audience isn't. So, the score is going to take that into consideration. I'm going to say 8 to 18 because of that, just kind of depending on what you are going for with your build. If you're going for an as appeared, then from the audience perspective, we're going to be more towards the 8 charisma. For the in-character perspective, it's going to be more of the 18. Higher up, people are going to be more fearful, and he's going to rely on that statistic a little more. But at the end of the day, that is your call. Moving on to the racing class, straightforward build. He's obviously a human. I would argue he is the human variant with proficiency in intimidation, and quite possibly even the feat of actor, which makes it easier to pass yourself off. I'm looking at it to make sure I'm getting it right. Makes it easier to pass yourself off as someone else and buffs your charisma by a +1. Another feat that you could go would be Inspiring Leader. And essentially what that does is it gives you can make a 10-minute speech, and it gives people temporary hit points equal to, here it is, your level plus your charisma modifier. So up to at maximum 25, I believe. I don't think there's a build that can get you more than 5 charisma. Plus 5 charisma. If there is, it would be, up to that. But essentially, for the average build, it would be 25, plus 25 maximum. Which is relatively useful. I mean, it gives you that little breath of fresh air, like leeway, as to not being able to die as easily. Or you could go normal and go with something like Spell Sniper or Warcaster. That's really your call. For the class, I'm going to say Wizard, specifically Evocation, because of his affinity for destruction. You could also go Enchantment for his ability to, persuade people and get them on his side of things. Just kind of to mimic his overall charisma sort of thing. That's really up to you. As for the conceptual build, Draco the Dragonborn, obviously. It's the way to go. No. High Elf. It really makes sense. I mean, the way he carries himself, the way he's supposed to be better than everyone else, that sort of thing. It kind of also works with his intelligence, and he gets an extra wizard cantrip, which is relatively nice if you're going the wizard build. So there is that. That is, of course, on top of the normal elven traits. As for the class, I'm going to say he has to be either a bard or a warlock. Both charisma-based casters. I'm going to go into bard first because I think that's the least likely or the less likely of the two. And then I'll go into warlock afterwards because I think that's probably the one that most people are going to go with if they do the conceptual build. But bard first. College of Whispers would make Draco Malfoy actually scary. Because that's all about kind of making people go crazy and then buffing yourself along the way. So, essentially, you can make people go crazy, and then after people die, you can use their shadows to kind of shapeshift almost? Disguise yourself is more the correct word. It kind of fits because he was near Dumbledore when he died, but it's not in your face, this is Draco Malfoy. College of Lore would also be useful. Although, admittedly, this is going to be more of a NPC build if you're doing, an evil campaign and Draco's on your side sort of thing. Or if you wanted Draco to be more of a minor character, and, your party is fighting more Lord Voldemort, Draco's there kind of to buff them. Essentially, what College of Lore would do, it allows for the characters to be buffed. I would argue, as I said, this is more for the DM. But yeah, it's just kind of like an overall buffing people on his side sort of thing, which is going to be more useful for the DM. Now, it could be an interesting Draco Malfoy playthrough for a character. I'm not, denouncing it, but you're not going to be the main character at that point, I wouldn't think. So it's really your call if you want to go that or not. As for Warlock, I'm mainly focusing on the patrons here, and then we do the Pact Boon afterwards. But the patron first, the Undying is a possibility. That centers around cheating death and benefiting yourself in that way. Almost like a healer, but, wearing black, and, evil. Your call. The Great Old One would be useful. It has more dealing in the realm of the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. Voldemort is, not old, but he's supposed to be, the Great One, and, he is older than Harry Potter, so, do with that what you will. As for what it does, I mean, it allows you to kind of read thoughts some and create thralls, which would sort of make Crab and Goyle, like, useless. You wouldn't essentially have to have players playing Crab and Goyle. You could raise your own in that sense. So worthwhile if you don't have the extra people to play. Pact of the Fiend would also kind of work. It deals with more protection of yourself and just generally making others have a bad time. So there is that as well. As for the invocations, I'm going to read them off just to make it easier on everyone. In the order I would recommend getting them for the most part. Let's see. Where do they start? Here they are. Agonizing Blast is the one that I would go with first. Essentially what that does is it allows you to add your Charisma modifier to Eldritch Blast, and as we all know, that is a must for a Warlock. Eldritch Sight allows you to detect magic at will, so that's pretty useful. Beguiling Influence gives proficiency in Deception and Persuasion, both very good things if you're going a Charisma-based build for Draco Malfoy. Devil's Sight allows you to see normally in darkness, magical or not. And given the coloration in the movies, it would be very useful. Also, if you're going more the human build, it would be useful as well because it essentially gives you dark vision to an extent. But it's also magical dark vision, so you can see through magical darkness, which is really useful. Here we are. Beast Speech is useful, however, it doesn't explicitly tie in with Draco, although it could kind of tie in with like Snake Speech and that sort of thing, and then if he had an animal companion, which I don't remember if he did or not. I don't remember seeing one, but that doesn't mean he didn't. It would be useful there, because then he could converse with that. Beast Speech allows you to communicate with animals at will, for what it actually does. Visions of Distant Realms allows you to cast Arcane Eye at will, and essentially what that does is it allows you to see off in the distance. You can create like a small eye that can go places and get through like small holes and cracks in like walls, and it essentially just allows you to see what's going on elsewhere. It's kind of a utility spell, and again, that's at will. Eldritch Mind gives you advantage on concentration checks, or to put it in terms everyone can understand, Constitution saving throws to maintain concentration. It's also called a concentration check if you are not familiar with it. Alternatively, anything that buffs Eldritch Blast is pretty useful. As for the Pact Boon, this is finishing up the build. That's really up to you. However, the one that fits Draco the most, in my opinion, is the Pact of the Tome. I was trying to get the exact word. And that just makes sense because of spellcasting, is really all it is. As for his backstory, he is the son of Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy. Narcissa Malfoy. He was a pureblood wizard. He was raised to believe strongly in the importance of blood purity. He was also raised to hate Harry Potter. I'm going to go ahead and say spoiler alert for this sentence. 3, 2, 1. He was the son of a Death Eater, which I believe was Lucius, but it also could have been Narcissa. I don't remember exactly which one was which offhand. Or which one it was offhand. This, of course, caused a very easy, rivalry between Draco Malfoy and Harry Potter, especially given that they attended Hogwarts starting in the same year. That is where Draco Malfoy's story begins. That is all I have for you fine adventurers today. I hope you enjoyed. Sorry for the pauses and that sort of thing. I was just trying to make sure that I did everything correctly, and I didn't have Chill here to back me up and help me out. He should be back soon, but I can't make any guarantees because we never really know what the future holds. Next week, I will be talking about Lord Voldemort, so be on the lookout for that. And Just a friendly reminder that you can join my Discord and check me out on Twitch. Links will be down in the description below, so make sure to check that out if you feel so inclined. Other than that, I will catch you all later.